Hey, welcome back to the Socialist Shelf with me, Jacob, and my buddy Joss here.
Hello.
And this is our Christmas special, actually. I'm not sure when this is going to come out. It's definitely not going to be Christmas time, but it is our Christmas special because we decided we wanted to do Christmas Carol sometime back in December. We started recording after December. So we're still doing it, though. We're still doing it, though, because it's a book that deserves to be discussed anytime during the year, I think.
Planting our feet in the beach and standing firm against the tide of linear time.
Absolutely. And I mean, uh, we're firm warriors in the war on Christmas to stand on the side. The ghosts are soldiers, are the Christmas strongest soldiers
Down,
fighting.
down, down with Santa, up, up, up with elves.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I did hear someone say the other day that the war on Christmas will not end until Christmas stopped its illegal occupation of other months.
Oh yeah,
The
yeah, no.
December.
Yeah, Arbor Day has suffered enough.
And that's fair enough. I'm not the type to start singing Christmas carols in January, but fortunately, this book I think it definitely has cross appeal. It is The Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. If you haven't read it, you've probably seen a movie, a play, at least heard a song, some kind of reference to it. It's pretty much impossible to have escaped The Christmas Carol in mass media.
Yeah, A Christmas Carol and Dickens's works in general. Like his works have never been out of print. He is one of the most adapted authors that I can think of. He's had like over 200 adaptations of his stuff. Of course, the Christmas Carol adaptations in one form or another. I think everybody's at least heard about.
Yeah, it's incredibly, it's got an incredible legacy. I mean, like the legacy section on Wikipedia is like the same size as the rest of the article. Um, it's massive, and I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that, and we'll go into it. I just wanted to say about Dickens in general is Dickens is very much a class analysis kind of guy. This is a guy who, and we'll get into it a little more, but this is a guy who absolutely grew up working class, absolutely went through some pretty horrific stuff in the early 1800s, which is really just the not the dawning of industrial capitalism, but it's real ramping up. Really seeing the Industrial Revolution, really seeing its consequences on the affected countries. And all his work really reflects that. Do
Yeah.
you want to like give a rundown on Dickens, who he was, what people may or may not know about him, Joss?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's good that you mentioned the Industrial Revolution because, of course, from Dickens's name, from Dickens's work, of course, we get the term Dickensian, literally coined to describe what you imagine when you think of Industrial Revolution era London, right? Like um smoky factory towns, filthy children in the streets, on their way home
Oi,
from
sir, may
being
I have a
child
copper?
laborers.
Yeah.
What's up?
I said, oi, sir, may I have a copper? That kind of thing.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes, and Dickens actually became kind of he was known for transcribing accents in that way. You can
Hmm.
instantly hear when you read whether it's Cockney or something else. And
Yeah.
actually, a Cockney character was his first one of his first like major breakout. Well, it contributed to the success of the Pickwick Papers. I'll get into it. He was born in Portsmouth in 1812. Dickens was, and he had a fairly decent childhood up to a point. His father's living was enough to get him at least a middle class education. But his father went into some serious debt, and from about 12 to 15, Dickens had to work in a bootblacking factory, bringing in money for the family, putting labels on pots of boot polish for 6 shillings a week. And he had to be a family breadwinner because his father was in debtor's prison at the time. And this ended when his father, John Dickens, received an inheritance from his mother dying, which was used to pay off his creditors. So Dickens
Bleak.
was, yeah,
Very bleak.
yeah, yeah. So Dickens was exposed from a very young age to, the horrors of child labor, to the horrors of, everybody in the family having to bring in money just to survive. Um, But growing up, it didn't really blunt his blunt his ambition at all. He read Robinson Crusoe, he read Arabian Nights, he read everything he could get his hands on. He had a brilliant memory, and he frequently channeled his experiences, his surroundings into his work. You'll see, if you read up on Dickens, you see various parallels, various inspirations, buildings, and people he met popping up in his work again. And of course, his time working in his desultory conditions instilled in him a righteous indignation at the plight of working people. So that shot through all his familiar environment popping up in his work. And later, in fact, he would describe the Tories, the Conservative Party in Britain, as people whom politically I despise and abhor. That's a quote.
Yeah. And I mean, it comes through. I mean, he does not like rich people very much.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
In any capacity. And that's not just in this work. This is in every work. No matter where you go, what angle it goes through, whether it be, him having an incredibly sympathetic view of the French Revolution, whether it be, just the plight of people on the street, whether it be the twisted machinations and great expectations. It's every single angle. Like the quote, I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards. That was Dickens.
Oh yeah, Dickens is not one for subtlety. He's known for very idealized characters. Your Oliver Twists, who can essentially do no wrong. He's got those caricatured villains. I always think of Miss Havisham from Great Expectations.
Yep.
The decaying woman driven insane and man-hating after she's left at the altar at her wedding.
Right, or like Fagin, someone like that.
Oh yeah, exactly. And again, I'll mention Fagin here in a minute, but
Sure.
Yeah. So from 1827, when he finally gets out of his bootblacking gig, from the age of about 15, he works as a junior clerk at a law office, what we would call today a paralegal, for about a year and a half. He goes to the theater religiously at this time. He claimed for about 3 years to have gone to the theater every single day. And ultimately, in 1832, he scores this audition at Covent Garden. He wants to be an actor at this time, he thinks. Ultimately, he misses it because of a really bad cold. So there but for the sniffles, goes the alternate universe where Charles Dickens was a celebrated Shakespearean actor or whatever.
I did not know that. Wow.
Yeah. No, I only learned this recently as I was doing the research.
It kind of makes sense though. Like the way because he went on, I know, and I know you might get to it, but he was known for doing public readings of his work and was beloved for that. So it kind of tracks.
Oh yeah, especially later in his life. It's actors do make really good readers. There's a story I'll get into about it. So he scores an audition at Covent Garden. He misses it because of a cold, and not long after that, he submits his first story, A Dinner at Poplar Walk. And he's doing this while he's working as a political journalist. So he's covering parliamentary campaigns, he's covering parliamentary debates, and his first real break is in 1836. 1836, he publishes the Pickwick Papers. That's his breakout literary hit. He sells 40,000 copies a month, especially after the fourth volume, because that's when he introduces that Cockney character that I mentioned. What was his name? I can't believe I didn't write it down.
Not sure.
Sam
Weller.
Sam Weller. Yeah.
Because it became that was a big phenomenon. It had like bootleg copies, joke books, all kinds of stuff.
Joke books, it spawned, and it wasn't the first. It wasn't a new phenomenon, Sam. The first really big franchise novel, if I remember correctly, was about 100 years earlier when Samuel Richardson came out with Pamela or Virtue Rewarded.
Yeah.
And that had China, that had puzzles and whatnot. Funnily enough, actually, there was boot polish branded after the Pickwick Papers.
Very weird.
Yeah, but so. Even so, Dickens was not the first to franchise his stuff, but he was the foremost literary celebrity of his time in Britain, probably in the world, bar none. You might have heard that he was paid by the word. This wasn't true. He was paid by the serialized installments. And this wasn't just for his benefit. Like printing his stories serially was like super cheap. It cost
Right.
about a shilling to run off a chapter of the Pickwick Papers, as opposed to the standard price for printing a book was something like 31 and change.
Well, it's
Um,
fascinating because, like, we think of Dickens as like fairly ancient. I mean, he's not, but like, it very removed from us. But it is a very I could think of him almost like a Shakespearean figure or something like that, despite their like the great bounds of time between them. But you can see how capitalist the society he's writing in is versus some of these other figures I might associate him with hundreds of years before, who the great value would be placed in the tome sent out. And he is writing in a world that honestly sounds a lot like ours, with like IP and like you got to do this to sell and
oh
whatnot and the
yeah.
other. It's interesting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We'll get into I mean, we could spend so long talking about copyright if we do some Shakespeare on the show
Oh
eventually.
yeah, no doubt.
Yeah,
No,
because that has its roots in his era.
yeah, nothing
Uh
new under the sun.
oh yeah. But yeah, so if you've written fan fiction, then you understand the model that the business model that he was writing under, right? Each installment creates demand for the next. Publishers can recoup the cost in part while publication is going on. The author can be paid as he goes. Just like on like fanfiction.net or Archive of Our Own, right?
I'm
You
not going to
release.
publicly admit to knowing what either of those things are, but I might.
But yeah, you understand. You build up an audience. They anticipate the next installment. That's how E.L. James got her start. When
Yeah,
she was
yeah.
writing Twilight fan fiction.
Eh, we
But
make
yeah,
it some way or
so
another.
yeah, exactly. And indeed, Pickwick certainly made it for Dickens. It actually paid for most of his wedding expenses.
Nice.
That same year that Pickwick Papers is released, he marries his wife, Catherine Hogarth, with whom he goes on to have 10 children. It's a good marriage at first. It's a good long marriage, and then 21 years into it, in 1857, he starts an affair with an actress, Ellen Ternan. She's 18, he's 45 at the time, so kind of cringe. And he
Yeah,
separates,
wow.
yeah, and then he separates from his wife the following year, which at the time, it's Victorian England. That's a big scandal. But even so, like his, you know, despite what goes on in his personal life, he's a big philanthropist. He donates liberally to hospitals with the proceeds from his writing. He survives a train crash in 1865. He attends to the wounded. He saves some lives in that incident. Um, and ultimately he devotes his life, and A Christmas Carol is a big contributor to fostering that philanthropy in others, in the general public. Charitable giving soars in the wake of its release. And ultimately in 1870 he dies of a stroke after a full day's work on his very last book, The Mystery of Edwin Drood. It was half finished on his death.
Wow.
Yeah, the literary journal that he started all the year round, that starts in 1859. It outlives him. It runs till 1895, after his son takes over when he dies. In that literary journal was serialized two of his best known works, Great Expectations and A Tale of Two Cities. During
Oh, fire.
yeah, and during Great Expectations run, his literary journal all the year round actually surpassed that of the London Times. So, more people are reading about, Pip and Miss Havisham and Magwitch than about, current events.
Man.
Yeah, it's echoes of now, right?
No, that makes perfect sense.
Mm.
I can totally see it. And yeah, okay, that's fascinating context on who he was.
Hmm.
And I know he loved, this novel a lot. He did a lot of readings of it, like you were saying. He was, this was a novel that was really just, I mean, people really, really were into the Christmas Carol, A Christmas Carol when it came out, and also, you know, ever since. I believe it sold out like on its first day. I read A
Yeah,
Christmas Carol. The first day it was like people were at the stores ready to buy it. Yeah, to get into the novel itself on its own merits, despite the fact that it has this folklore status of being this huge piece of fiction, this thing that everyone knows, whether they've seen the Muppets version, whether they've seen, Scrooge, whether they've seen a play, whether they've seen the Disney version, a million and one versions, a million and one plays, references, and this and that, is worth engaging with on its own terms. I mean, the novel is remarkably well written. I mean, Dickens earned every bit of his fame, and it is this voice that is very unique. It sounds very modern, not in the sense that that his language is modern, but in this sort of self-aware type way. I wouldn't call it ironic exactly. It's not like Deadpool, like winking at you or something ironic, but it is direct communication from author to reader. I mean, it opens up with Marley was dead to begin with. There was no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. And then it says a little later, it says a little later that it says, like, remember, Marley's dead, or nothing that happens after this seems wondrous. It constantly is communicating with the reader in ways that aren't really winking at and making fun of the text in a way that we might expect out of a modern novel that has a narrator like this. But it does communicate directly in a way that you were listening to a story, to the extent that you could almost imagine sitting around a fire and there's a guy and you have some cocoa and there's this guy reading it to you, which indeed is how a lot of people engaged with this book going to see Dickens read it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's it makes it very as you say, it keeps you very well in mind that this is a story, and what does a story have? It has a moral.
Yep. There's no, yeah.
He's really stripping away the mystique essentially from the ghosts, and being like, look, these devices, these characters are here for a reason.
Yeah, and Dickens always writes like this to an extent. I mean, come on, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Like this, like we were saying earlier, he wanted to be an actor, this almost monologue type way. But this is very directly, almost fable-like, almost like it could be told to you by, some kind of teacher or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, this is a fable into the extent that, like, he did write this story before he wrote this story. Not a lot of people know this, but he had already written almost this exact story as a short story prior to it. The story of the goblins who stole a sexton. Have you ever heard of that?
I had come across that name. I hadn't read it. I don't know if you had,
Sexton,
but
I don't know if y'all know. It's an officer of the church. I didn't really know what that term was. I had to check. But yeah, it's a story of a guy named Gabriel Grubb, who's a mean-spirited sexton who goes under a Christmas conversion because he gets visited by goblins who show him the past and future, which is even more, fable sounding than this. And he just decided he was going to rewrite it further and do it this way, which is very interesting. And also it's funny because, a lot of authors out there are incredibly stressed about being original and this and that. And then you look at like some of the greats like Dickens, and he's like, this story I already wrote, I'm just going to write it again. They'll love it. And guess what? Mm-hmm. Everyone did.
Oh yeah, you can rip yourself off as much as you want,
awesome.
and what a classically Dickensian name, right? Gabriel Grubb, yeah, he was known for that. Like, that was commented on even in his time. He's got all kinds of those in his work. There's Uncle Pumblechook from Great Expectations. There's one of his right before A Christmas Carol, he wrote a book called Martin Chuzzlewit, right?
And of course Ebenezer Scrooge.
Yes.
Great name. And I mean, Scrooge is now a name, it's a term that anyone knows. Like, probably people who don't even know what this is a reference to know what Scrooge is before they learn what A Christmas Carol is as a kid.
Oh yeah, it's Grinch before Grinch was Grinch,
Right. Well, unfortunately for both Grinch and Scrooge, they both went through a transformation at the end, but they never really escaped the connotation of their names.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Big bummer.
Yeah, there's no Scrooge isn't really synonymous with somebody who goes through a change, right? He's not although you see from the beginning, the way that he describes Scrooge here in this early paragraph here: hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. It's To me, that's kind of dialectical, like
Mhm.
he's flint, there is steel that can strike out fire. It just hasn't struck yet.
Yeah, it's there. That's the thing. It's worth noting. We can do some plot summary. Again, though, people probably know the plot. Scrooge, incredibly wealthy guy. I mean, it doesn't say exactly how wealthy, but he's a moneylender and he's a landlord. He's a creditor. He's every basically annoying and bad thing you can think of. He's
Mm,
that. Like in at this time also you have debtors prison in London, which you have people literally thrown into prison over their debts very regularly, like we even talked about earlier. Dickens' own father was. So this guy is, the most hated of the most hated. He is, the scum of society. He is the most despised parasite you can possibly conceive of.
mm,
And he, I mean, clearly enjoys his job to like, not in the sense that he enjoys it like he's like, fulfilled in any sense, because Scrooge is so cold and icy and nothing. But the only thing he seems to derive any sort of pleasure from is just counting the figures at his job. And he's this guy who he used to have a partner, Jacob Marley. Jacob Marley had passed on some years ago, and Scrooge is so cheap, he has not struck the name from Marley, even from his business, because
mm.
he's not willing to do that.
Yeah.
He doesn't buy good things for himself. He eats crappy meals. He doesn't warm his house. He doesn't wear nice clothes. He's not happy in any capacity. He doesn't have any friends. He is just obsessed with seeing the numbers go up.
Oh yeah, and I think this is as good a time as any. This is a little bit early, but I'll throw out one of my favorite lines from this. It
Do it.
kind of sums him up pretty succinctly. It's in Stave 2 when he's speaking to the Ghost of Christmas Past. It's showing him remember when Scrooge was younger, he had a girlfriend. He had
Mhm.
a somebody with whom he was in love. Her
Yeah,
name was, what was her name again?
I don't remember off the top of my head. That's terrible. But what is it? Scrooge's love interest.
Yeah, he had a love interest, and eventually she.
Bell? Was it Bell?
Let me see.
Yeah, I think it was Bell.
Belle, yeah. And she's leaving him, because she recognizes that, you can never love you can never love anything so much as money, not even me, right? And Scrooge responds, this is the even-handed dealing of the world. There is nothing on which it is so hard as poverty, and there is nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth. He's like, look, being poor is the worst thing you can possibly be, so why are you, why would anybody take somebody to task for trying to get unpoor?
Yeah, and he's not wrong, in a certain sense. I mean, he is wrong, but in regards to his society, the things that it values, he's not necessarily made the wrong call. He's raised to make money. He's apprenticed out. He's taught. He's praised for being efficient his whole life. And then he becomes efficient and everyone hates him. Now, what's the reason for that? The reason for that is he lives in a system that's messed up,
Mm-hmm.
which, Dickens is not doing as much criticism of in this novel as the other ones. But to be fair, this is more mythical. This is more folk tale. This is more fable. So it makes sense that he's not doing like massive societal critique. But you can see it that he lives in a system that rewards the behavior of being a Scrooge, rewards the behavior of being a Jacob Marley, in being this just money grubber. And they are pushed into doing that. And the Bob Cratchits of the world, which is Scrooge's clerk, the nice people in the world, I mean, they do end up, but for the grace of God, or really the grace of just a nice rich guy who comes along, do end up poor and on the street if they're unlucky, and if they are lucky, then barely hanging on to a terrible house owned by a Scrooge.
And worth noting that Bob Cratchit makes 15 bob a week, 15 shillings a week, according to the text. Now, you remember Dickens himself, when he was 12 to 15 working in the bootblacking factory, he made 6 shillings a week. That's your quote unquote unskilled labor right there. Bob Cratchit working as not a paralegal, but an office clerk, he's making 2.5 times that. I looked this up. I don't have an exact number to mind, but 15 shillings a week makes him among the worst paid in his line of work in London at the time, maybe in all of Britain.
And working for the guy who's presumably the richest in his field. I mean, he is, even by the other merchants and people in the field, they kind of shudder to look at him. They're like, that guy is an absolute, shark.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Scrooge isn't just cruel to the people around him. He's not just cruel in his business practices. He's also directly cruel to his employees. I think Bob Cratchit may be his only employee he gets referenced. I would assume he probably has like enforcers and stuff for his evictions. But Bob Cratchit is his only referenced employee, and he does not pay him very well at all, despite the fact that he works this man to the bone. He makes him work in the absolute freezing cold. I mean, the guy is absolutely going through it. And you can feel a little bit of Dickens' resentment, probably from his days as a paralegal.
100%.
It absolutely jumps out. Like, this is a guy who's worked both horrible manual jobs, but also horrible, like, white collar, quote unquote, jobs. You can feel it.
Yeah, and there's another great line. It's just bursting with this stuff. You have Cratchit on the second page here, being very, very cold, working in the office, and he's trying to warm himself with a candle, in which effort, not being a man of a strong imagination, he failed. It's funny, it's very blackly funny, and it's something that you can imagine that Dickens himself put his imagination to when he was working in his bootblacking factory. You have nothing but your imagination.
And it's worth noting that it's worth noting that at this time there's also this very direct and this may be a weird point, but it's a thing that kept coming back to me after I read about Dickens' life before I reread this book, that heat has this association with coal and oil. And coal and oil have this very direct association with very direct, very brutal extraction in your same country for the most part, with coal or surrounding areas. While Britain at this time is absolutely extracting from all over the world, most of their coal was coming from nearby at home. Dickens was known to visit the coal mines and visit the children who worked in the coal mines, and he was horrified by it. And he was known to go and, part of his charity went towards that. And so it's also this interesting correlation of heat and cold and this and that, that would then be on the minds of the people. So even when you're talking about, getting Cratchit a shovel full of coal or something like that, it's something that would be on the minds of the people, especially poorer people, where that coal even comes from. Because, and it's worth noting, I mean, we touched on it, Dickens lived under a form of capitalism that had not reached its highest stage, which is imperialism. While there was imperialism, it had not reached the imperial stage of capital. You know what I mean? Like,
it was before that labor aristocracy, as Lenin described it, could really arise in Britain. Before that misery could be started, could start being exported abroad. Not that there wasn't still misery at home, but
right. But it hadn't reached this sort of apex. Britain is still on this ascent at this time. It is extracting directly from its people in the way that it now, maybe extracts from the global South. It was going through this industrializing process that everywhere has ever been done has been, to some extent, pretty brutal. And over a period of decades, it goes through this brutal, horrible, soul-wrenching process through which the industrial capacity of the country is created. And then, and then it uses it to colonize the rest of the world. Not that its colonizing hadn't already happened, but it really reaches its stage of imperialism at really the turn of the century. And at this time, a lot of the direct extraction is happening from the people. So there is a level of misery
Hmm.
that is being inflicted on these people that makes the class divide all that more obvious.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and the extraction all that more obvious. It's harder to do commodity fetishism when you know how the commodities are made and they're made right down the road from you, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It was the funnily enough, it was the conditions of the working class in Manchester that partly inspired him to write this book. Engels would be proud.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Exactly. And yeah, you can see these working class, the working class and the ruling class have this very stark divide. And it is interesting reading in this time that is, definitively capitalistic, but not the capitalism we know. It's
which
very
makes Dickens is, that was the other thing about Dickens, is that he made this conscious effort um to not only tell these stories, but to tell these stories to a new class of people. At the time, if you were among the illiterate working poor, you could pay a half a penny to get into a reading. Right. And this opened up literature to, it was audiobooks before audiobooks were audiobooks.
right.
It opened up literature to this whole new class of people who otherwise wouldn't be able to consume these stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And even his books, he tried to keep the prices low. It actually hurt him financially. This book didn't make him very much money at all, actually, due to some of it.
No.
They wanted to mark up the price. Of course, it would have been it would have been really hypocritical of him to mark up the price of this book, all things
Mhm.
considered. But let's we'll move along the plot. Who then again, again, if you're listening to this, you probably know what happens. But Scrooge is going to have a confrontation with his own nature. Scrooge goes home. Scrooge sees the face of Jacob Marley, his ex-business partner, on the doorknob. He's scared, but he still goes inside. He won't light his house because he's an absolute miser. And his dead friend visits him, shows up as a specter, locked in chains, chained to contracts, chained to money boxes, chained to bags of coins, all manner. I confess that I cannot see this scene without seeing the Muppet scene, which is the two old men Muppets
Marley
show
and
up.
Marley, yes.
Oh
Statler and
man,
Waldorf.
it's so good. It's so good. Uh, and again, I think I might have said it earlier. That is my favorite Christmas movie. It goes back. I was actually terrified of it as a kid, which makes me love it more now. Which it's hilarious that I was scared by that scene. But like I think when I was like 4, I was like really scared of that scene.
That and as well, the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come is invariably one of the most terrifying parts of any adaptation of A Christmas Carol, and rightly so.
Absolutely. And pretty scary in this book, which actually my favorite quote from the book comes from that. But yeah, Marley in this book and in other adaptations, whether it be by song or in this book by direct address, says, "Hey man, I did a really, really bad job of being a human being. I messed up, and now I am cursed to walk the earth for indeterminate amount of time, a very, very, very long time. I don't know that he says eternally, but a very long time. In these chains, seeing human beings, and seeing their good parts of them and the bad parts of them, and the good parts of them seeing the things I never engaged in, and seeing them for their actual value, and seeing the miseries of humans, and seeing I could have helped, and now I no longer have the capacity to help, and I see it from an objective standpoint." And basically, Scrooge, you have forged chains for yourself. Every chain I wear, I made in life. I know every link. I know every reason for it. Man, I'm showing up just to tell you, like, you have to change. And this is, I believe, a direct reference to the biblical story of the rich man and Lazarus, which is a story Jesus told, a parable of a man who went to hell and a man who went to heaven. The rich man went to hell, the poor man went to heaven. And the rich man says, in hell, let me return to earth, please, so I may at least warn the others of what is coming. And he is told that no one will listen. And it's so directly connected that it seems very much like a reference to it, which is interesting because Scrooge does listen, So I don't know if that's like Charles Dickens trying to say like if I was in the Bible it would have been different, but like the connections, like even the quotes are incredibly similar.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of and Dickens himself was a devout Christian, so there's that element of it running through all of his work. But this work especially, there's literal appeals to there's literal appeals to be charitable, to set yourself on the course to embrace heaven's mercy, all that.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's a biblical reference indeed, that the reference to, oh yeah, the joke about Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now, refers to the bowels of compassion from the first epistle of John.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting, Christianity is woven without, which I mean, of course, it's Christmas, so there's obviously the natural connection there. But also more than Christmas in the secular sense, there's also Christmas in the very, or I'm sorry, Christianity in the very, literal Christian sense, which was believed by Dickens, and also, but it is interesting how he subverts the story of the rich man and Lazarus in that way, which reflecting on, yeah, if you're interested, go and read that. You'll see the parallels very starkly. And I don't have like a great takeaway with what he was trying to do, but there is a clear connection. And Marley's like, you're gonna see three spirits. Everybody knows the story. And then Scrooge looks outside, and this gets cut from most adaptations, which is a bummer because it's a great moment. And Scrooge looks outside, and he sees just the streets full of ghosts of the like bourgeoisie, basically, like just ghosts of the wretched ruling class. And they're like walking down the streets, and they see poor people, and they try to help them and get blown away by the wind. And they're dragging giant safes behind them, and everything they thought would help them. There's the classic line, "You can't take your money with you." They actually did, and they wish they hadn't.
Right. And as you mentioned, the misery with them all was clearly that they sought to interfere for good in human matters and had lost the power forever. It's people who have completely surrendered to to these structures that maintain, poverty and ignorance and want in society, right? It's people who are completely beholden to their own class interests.
Absolutely. And Scrooge, he's not totally convinced. He's like, maybe I'm seeing a vision. He has that great line, there's more gravy than grave to you, saying he might have eaten some bad food or something like that.
Yeah, that's the thing. That is funny. He's like, he's not he's not much in the habit of cracking jokes, as the text says, but he's trying to, this is his coping mechanism.
Absolutely. And I mean, what are you supposed to do when your dead business partner rolls up? I mean, what are you supposed to do? So he somehow manages to go to sleep. I always found that to be remarkable. But he does. And the first ghost appears to him, the ghost of Christmas past. And man, is this ghost weird. This is the weirdest of the three ghosts, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, it's remarkably, it's different from the angelic kind of childlike ghost that we see in the Muppet Christmas Carol. It gets interpreted sometimes as a beautiful woman ghost, but here it's full of contradictions, right? It's a strange figure like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance of having receded from the view and being diminished to a child's proportions, right? So it's like an old man who is like who only looks small because like it looks like you're looking at him from far away. It's weird, right? Like a face that's not wrinkly, but his hair is white as snow, and he's got kind of a blush on his skin. It's odd. It's full of contradictions, as I
Here's
said.
a question. Does the ghost ever get well, sorry, the ghost gets gendered. Like there's like a few references to being as he. It is like remarkably like the ghost is described in a remarkably androgynous sense,
Hmm.
which I just find worth noting. And I think that just like is part of like sort of the weirdness. It's also worth noting that it has a light beam coming out of its head, and it has a cap that it holds, and Scrooge wants to see it in its cap, and it says the cap was made out of people, of the wills of people like Scrooge. So presumably this light is like the light of Christmas, the light of truth, the light of Jesus Christ from a Christian perspective. And people like Scrooge are the one who cap this ghost. Which
Actively.
it's like art online that's pretty good, but it's a weird thing to imagine of this old, young, something or another androgynous creature with a light beam coming out of its head.
Well, and it's like I'm only coming up with this just now, but I mean, think back to, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, right? Can you remember perfectly where you were and what was going on any given day?
Not aside from a few very specific events, no.
Hmm. Yeah, it's certain details that jump out to you, but the totality of it, I think, is lost.
Mhm.
I think there's something to that.
Absolutely. And past is here to remind you of that. And the thing is, Scrooge is taken into his past, and he's immediately, he remembers it. He smells the odors, he sees the sights. I like that it notes the odors immediately, and interestingly enough, science since Dickens's day has proven that smell is actually the sense most closely related to memory, which is a very interesting thing that Dickens kind of picked up on that naturally, just like with his writer's spirit. I really like that. That just shows how intuitive he was. Because it says Scrooge was immediately conscious of 1,000 odors. And Scrooge is taken back to his past. He sees the schoolyard. He sees, this boarding school he stayed in. This boarding school that is described as, it's like nice. Like he is of a social standing that he can be sent to boarding school and the pay is there. But he's not going to, the creme like the cream of the crop, Like he's not going to the nicest boarding school. This place is still kind of crumbling. It's still kind of junky, and also notably he is left there every single Christmas.
Kind of a he's kind of an do you think he's kind of from a nouveau riche kind of background?
I don't know. Does it say anything about his background aside from just that his dad, like he had a weird relationship with his dad and eventually his dad called him home, but like I think that's all you have. His dad eventually calls him home, but he was originally like a cruel man.
Yeah, he doesn't really come from money. He doesn't really
No,
come from money,
enough
which
money to go to
is
boarding school though. That is notable
right.
because it's not like
Not old
publicly
money.
available at this time.
Hmm. Yeah, and he's got he's got similar tastes to a young Charles Dickens at the time. He's reading I was just looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's reading all kinds of like great books. He's engaging with this stuff. He's getting smart. He has this education, but he's in this very insular environment of people who, while not wealthy, are strivers. Presumably middle class strivers. It's worth noting that if you're a middle class kid getting sent to one of these schools, it's not like, oh yeah, go inherit the parents' business. It's
Right.
we're sending you to this school and you're gonna get to the top. Like he is driven. There is a grind set spirit, like what we would call it, implanted in him from an early age, and there is an investment put in him, and he feels that very acutely. And he doesn't really even have the great familial relationships. He's left there over every Christmas, which you immediately see the negative associations with Christmas, which is like, a very basic, psychological thing, but it's notable.
Yeah, and it's kind of autobiographical in that sense, because from a very early age, right, as we mentioned, Dickens had to scrimp and save and breadwin for his family as well, and like the stuff that he mentions he mentions the stuff that Scrooge mentions his younger self reading, the stories that he was enamored with, Alibaba, Robinson Crusoe. That's pulled directly out of Dickens's past.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also shows that he was a kid. He's not. Most of Dickens' characters are fairly one-dimensional, especially villainous types. But in this case, you see Scrooge's formation, despite him being a one-dimensional villain in the present day. And you see, oh wow, you have like this sympathy for him.
Mm-hmm.
And then he moves on. He becomes an apprentice to Fezziwig, or he calls him Old Fezziwig. And he a man who basically, we don't know much about his business, but we know he threw great parties. Basically,
he threw great parties, and he was he's the sort of. You get the sense that he's the sort of person that Scrooge should have grown up to be, had he that, sense of charity that he's later instilled with. Spoiler alert.
Yes. And so yeah, he's with Fezziwig, and then it moves into his relationship shortly after that. It doesn't get focused too much. It doesn't get focused too much on. But yeah, then it focuses on, it has this moment of he was in a relationship, he was engaged, but he kept putting off the marriage because he was obsessively chasing money. Mm-hmm. And eventually she threw him away, basically saying, hey, like, you don't actually love me, you love money. And then that line from earlier shows up. And also right now, me just searching her name, I realized the name Belle only shows up once. So I think we can be forgiven both for briefly forgetting it.
Belle, said the husband, turning to his wife with a smile. I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon. That is, wow, really?
Yeah, that was.
Never noticed that.
It's so brief.
Man,
and that comes. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that is really telling. Like even that that defining experience, that formative experience of, this person that he loved being like, I don't want to see you again. Like, even in that moment, Scrooge can't remember her name.
Yeah, her name only comes later on from her husband, the guy who actually loves her.
Mm-hmm. He never would have known it otherwise.
That's fascinating. To the extent that
it rather.
I was actually earlier thinking I was going to edit out the part where we were both scrambling for a name because we sounded like idiots, but actually it works now because that was an intentional choice by Dickens. Wow, that's awesome. Hats off to Dickens for that one. Yeah, no. So Scrooge sees that, and then he sees that Belle gets married to someone that she actually loves, and has this, and she's in this great relationship, and she has this beautiful daughter, and there's all this, this great stuff going on. And it also has this very weird scene where Dickens pauses the novel just to like focus on how attractive Belle's daughter is. I don't really know what the point of is, but it's kind of funny because it's like her adult daughter is so attractive, and Dickens is enough of a he's communicating enough directly with the reader to just be like, by the way, this woman is very hot. It's a very weird thing to do, but it's just kind of what we're working with.
Yeah, it's a look into the past and enjoy what you have while you have it. Certainly.
Great. So at this point, after this experience, Scrooge
does essentially what he's been doing his whole life. I get the sense he says, spirit, remove me from this place. And the spirit's like, dude, this is what happened. I'm just showing this to you. Don't blame me. And Scrooge ultimately takes the spirit's cap and by a sudden action, pressed it down upon its head, puts the light out, basically shoves these things in the past that he's been shoving into the back corners of his mind his whole life.
Did you read this book on Project Gutenberg, by the way?
I did, yes.
Do you have the art pulled up for when he caps the spirit?
I do. It's very, very funny. It looks like he's just if you've ever played like Sorry, right? He's got one of those like triangular pieces that he's just like shoving down.
It's very funny. I just wanted to note that, but he slams it down, and that's the thing. I think it captures it well because it is a moment of gravitas, and it is dramatic, but it's also very goofy that it's happening. Like at the end of the day, he is slamming a cap over a spirit's head. Like that is very silly. And also, though, but in the moment you buy it as meaningful. And actually, that kind of is a pretty solid representation of the whole novel. Yeah, that moves us into the next stave, the next chapter.
I can't think of an adaptation where that preserves that.
I haven't seen. I have not seen every adaptation. I know there's some older movies. I've seen a decent number of them. I've seen the Disney one, obviously the Muppets one. I've seen, Bill Murray. I've seen the old black and white one. I don't recall that. I don't recall but
Him
this has been
BTFOing
adapted so many times. Not sure. I haven't seen the new animated one. Maybe it shows up in that. I'm not sure.
New animated one. Oh, this
Yeah,
is
there's
new.
some new animated movie. I didn't see it. At a certain point you see the story so many times and you're like, okay, well, Dickens did it and the Muppets did it. Who else is going to do it?
Exactly. What
Bill
could possibly
Murray.
be new?
Who else between Murray, the Muppets, and Dickens? You've kind of got your bases covered at that point. Yeah, he moves into the second of the three spirits at this point, stave 3, which they call chapter staves in this. I don't know if we noted that, but yeah, and you have the ghost of Christmas Present, who is the most jolly of the spirits. He's just this big giant, this big beautiful giant, with holly around his head and a big torch, and he's wearing this big green cloak, and he's very pleasant, and he's just a genuinely good guy. He is the spirit of all the best things about Christmas, all the warm and fuzzy. That's this guy.
Mm-hmm. And he's I have a friend who cosplays Jesus, and he's like really ripped, right? He's got incredible abs, and I can't help but think of him when I look at this art. It's a very, very attractive ghost.
Yeah, no, he's a good-looking guy. He's not ghostly really in any capacity aside from he changes size, sort of to fit the room. He's very big in one moment, but then he's also like smaller walking down the streets and with Scrooge. That's really his only, and obviously his powers, but he doesn't seem particularly ghostly. He seems more like a demigod or something.
Well,
like
yeah,
that.
the living embodiment of all the ways that the Christmas spirit can manifest, right? You have your big feasts and you have your small intimate dinners, right?
Yeah,
He's
absolutely.
whatever he needs to be.
And he takes Scrooge to these things. He takes Scrooge on a long journey. He takes him to see captains celebrating Christmas. He sees in prison people celebrating Christmas. He sees on the streets people celebrating Christmas. All across the world, people celebrating Christmas. Scrooge is inundated with this holiday joy. And, most notably, there's really two incredibly notable moments. The first is he goes and he sees his nephew. His nephew, who is a very minor character who appeared earlier, wished Scrooge a Merry Christmas and got humbugged off. But his nephew and his family hanging out, having Christmas dinner, and despite all the animosity that maybe Scrooge had towards him, that nephew was like, yeah, my uncle is not a particularly good guy, but you know what? I'm gonna always ask him to come. He's family. And then they play like a guessing game where where he chooses Scrooge basically as the 20 questions-esque answer to the question, and Scrooge finds it to be very amusing, which actually shows a growth in his character, I think.
Yeah, it's remarkably, he takes it in a remarkably good humor, and it's not even that sudden, I would say. Like he has again, he has that sense of humor, right? It just hasn't been deployed in a particularly constructive way until recently.
Yeah, and then more notably, he goes to Bob Cratchit's house, his employee. And he sees how he lives, which is very poor, but with a family that's very beloved. He's with, his wife and his kids, and most notable among these characters, Bob Cratchit has a child named Tiny Tim, and Tiny Tim is a small boy on crutches with some sort of disability. And Tiny Tim has a great spirit about him, and loves Christmas more than anyone. He's very sweet of spirit. But it's pretty apparent that on Bob Cratchit's current salary and his current living conditions, Tiny Tim's just not going to make it in just the absolute meat grinder that is London.
Yeah, there's your idealized character right there. He's wise, and he's wise beyond his years, and he is, has the most charitable, kind spirit. He sees the good in everybody, and even something as pure as he cannot survive the ravages and the grind of a society that fails to feed its people.
I mean, fails to feed, and also is just directly pumping smog into the poorest streets, and it's just in every level. It's brutalizing. They're not in a particularly warm house. It says that their feast is meager. It says that they, all this stuff. He can't go to the doctor. It's expensive. The doctor takes his share. And despite all this, everyone's very positive. But Scrooge has this moment of empathy for him. Scrooge at this point has seen, these beauties of Christmas. He's seen his own past and reconnected with it. And now he's just like, oh man, it's like, is this kid going to die? What am I going to do? And then he has this newfound respect for Bob Cratchit because he has this external life outside being just this clerk that Scrooge can order around. So Scrooge has this moment where he sees, he's seen his past, but now he's seen the people directly around him, and he's able to, for a moment, see them as something other than, just numbers on a ledger.
Yeah, and it's very the Ghost of Christmas Present is very blunt with he's blunt with Scrooge when he asks, well, there's no way that Tiny Tim's going to just die, right? There's no way that this light's going to go out, and the ghost says, well, if things keep going on as they are, then yeah, he's dead. That kid's not long for this world.
Which I think might be the only thing the Ghost of Christmas Present says until the very end that's like anything less than just like pure positivity.
Well, and even then, when the spirit's being negative, right? He says, are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? He's turning Scrooge's words right back on him.
Right, because Scrooge earlier said that he doesn't care about the poor because there's prisons and workhouses, and so the only thing the spirit can do that's like negative is just to say, well, man, you said spirits and workhouses. Who cares about what happens at Tiny Tim?
Well, yeah, because in the end, he reflects the present in all its beauty and all its ugliness.
Absolutely. And so then we get to this moment. We get to this moment where the spirit is dying away. It's the end of Christmas, and he is, he's the spirit of the present, so he must die away. And he has these two kids huddled underneath his cloak. And this is also another thing that you don't really see in adaptations. These two children who come outside this cloak, and they're wretched, just horrific children. And the spirit says they're man's children. They cling to me, appealing from their fathers. The boy is ignorance, the girl is want. Beware them both in all their degree, but most of all, beware the boy. For on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased. And so there's these just two wretched creatures made by humanity who come to the spirit of the present, and they beg on the behalf of humanity, want and ignorance.
Yeah, and as he says, the one fosters the other, right? You have people who are kept, nose to the grindstone, who are kept working, your 16-hour days back then just to survive, right? You have people who can't afford to be literate. You have people who just don't have the time or the resources to organize, to better themselves,
Absolutely. And that's the point when Scrooge says, well, do they have no refuge or resource? And the spirit says, well, are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? Because these are the people you've dismissed every single day of your life. These are the people that you could have helped at any point, and you haven't. These are your children. These are the children's of man. These are not conditions that arise naturally. Ignorance and want are conditions that are direct choices of humanity, specifically people like Scrooge. And that's, on that dark note, it closes and moves into the last of the spirits, this phantom, this ghost of Christmas future. It's genuinely
Terrifying.
It's pretty creepy. I mean, there's no other way to put it. This phantom, this ghost of Christmas future, it's this hooded Grim Reaper-esque creature who has come to show him the future, and he walks the streets of the future London, however far in the future, seeing people talk about the death of this wretched, horrible, terrible man who, from the very beginning, it's very clear they're talking about Scrooge's own death, but Scrooge really just can't accept it until the end.
Mm-hmm. Because he's very, very good, as we've seen, at denying these things in himself.
Absolutely. And they go to he sees people who are selling off his belongings because he hasn't really left them to anyone, to a pawn shop guy named Old Joe. And Old Joe has sort of whispers of like Fagin or whatever to him. And you have businessmen who are talking about like, maybe I'll go to the funeral, I don't really care. You have people in the street, just no one cares. He's a guy who, despite all his importance, despite all his relevance, he's not important. In fact, the only happiness associated with his death is a guy who was going to get evicted from his home is now like, I'm going to have the time to get my money together because I owed it to Scrooge, and now I don't have to pay it off.
Mm-hmm.
Or I will have to pay it off, but I'll have time.
Yeah, he is just, he is just so many, contracts that he's so many contracts and he's so many debts, and he is, all these, all these agreements that he's drawn up, and he's all these commodities that he's left behind, and that's all that there is of him.
Right, and that's the chain he's forged, as Jacob Marley said, and he's
Mm-hmm.
reduced humans to numbers on a ledger, but he, in that process, has become nothing but numbers on a ledger.
Mm-hmm. Precisely, numbers on a ledger and curtains and whatever else we see of his being pawned.
Absolutely, and I mean, he has this moment where there's the bed where Scrooge, his own dead body, is lying, and he can't look at it. And I really love the quote here. And it's a fairly long quote, but it is my favorite quote from the book, so I'm going to read it. Quote, Scrooge glanced towards the phantom. Its steady hand was pointed to the head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, the motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face. He thought of it, felt how easy it would be to do so, and longed to do it, and had no more power to withdraw the veil than to dismiss the specter at his side. O cold, cold, rigid death, dreadful death, set up thine altar here and dress it with such terrors as thou hast at thy command, for this is thy dominion. But of the loved, revered, and honored head, thou canst not turn one hair to thy dread purposes, or make one feature odious. It is not that the hand is heavy and will fall down when released. It is not that the heart and pulse are still, but that the hand was open, generous, and true, the heart brave, warm, and tender, and the pulse a man's. Strike, shadow, strike, and see his good deeds springing from the wound to sow the world with life immortal. No word pronounced these words in Scrooge's ear, and yet he heard them when he looked upon the bed. He thought, if this man could be raised up now, what would be his foremost thoughts? Avarice, hard dealing, griping cares, they have brought him to a rich end truly. End quote. I mean,
It's a sermon.
Yeah, no, he's spitting. Like, there's no other way to put it. He is laying down facts. Like, he's just like, here's the deal, like, he's not being subtle. He's like, look, if you're good in life, there's one thing, and if you're bad in life, there's another thing. It's obviously it's very moralistic. This is a fable, so of course he's saying, think about what you do with your life. Think about the decisions you make. Think about what literally matters. And in this case, Scrooge has done nothing but pursue money, but pursue ledgers, pursue lock boxes, and every other thing that will make up his chain. And he knows that. He says, what would this man think of now? And he knows at this point who that man is. He's just not willing to admit it.
Exactly. Not until not until that crucial moment that everybody is aware of.
Yeah. And then what happens next? He goes, he finds out that Tiny Tim has passed away, which is very sad, but we already knew it was coming because of what the ghost said, of Christmas Present said. And finally he's forced to admit that the man is Scrooge. He sees his own tombstone, which is a pretty unsettling moment. With
his neglected grave, a neglected grave, as the text is quick to point out to us.
And it's interesting because he's got this, and Tiny Tim, it notes that it's noted by Bob Cratchit. He said, well, it would do you good to see how green the place is. There is a level of lushness and stuff to the grave of Tiny Tim, poor as it is. But Scrooge's is neglected and uncared for, despite, being this powerful man, and Tiny Tim being this, rather irrelevant little kid of a rather irrelevant little guy.
Yeah, but again, irrelevant only if you didn't seek that kind of spiritual fulfillment that was missing from Scrooge's life.
Absolutely. And and then Scrooge begs the spirit to spare him this fate. And the spirit, despite its hardness, its coldness, its shrouded awfulness, its hand wavers, pointing at the grave, and its hand falls aside, and Scrooge clutches at its robes, and then the robes turn to the sheets of his bed, and he's awake, and it's Christmas morning. And it was all a dream, sort of.
Yes. Yeah, it's all a dream, and Scrooge has that moment of euphoria, because he gets that he gets something that is difficult or even impossible, and he gets something that's very difficult or even impossible, which is a chance to reckon with everything that his life has been, and to change, to spin on a dime, not even on a dime really, but to acknowledge those parts of himself that he's kept hidden for so long.
Absolutely. And at that point that he's crying out to people on the street, saying Merry Christmas, he's bringing this giant turkey to Bob Cratchit's house. He's visiting his nephew. He's doing all these things, and it concludes on a very in the very Dickens sense, he's completely changed as a human being, and it has this beautiful over the top great ending, and it says that the last quote is, he had no further intercourse with spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards, and it was always said of him, he knew how to keep Christmas well. If any man alive possessed the knowledge, may that be truly said of us and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone. And it also has a quick moment saying Tiny Tim did not die. In fact, my version even bolds the did not, all caps, die.
Yeah, it's a nice bookend with Marley was dead to begin with. He was dead as a doornail. Don't forget, he's dead. This guy's died. Have I mentioned he's dead?
Yeah. And then versus Tiny Tim did not die. The delivery of that in a play or whatever would be great if the narrator said, and Tiny Tim just stop, make eye contact. Who did not die? And everyone pops off. That's the way of doing it. I truly believe that's probably how Dickens performed it. I have no idea, but that's just my guess.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, so it has this, of course, idyllic ending. And, it leaves us with the moral, because it's a moralistic story. It is a fable. And it leaves me asking, okay, what did we learn? Okay, yeah, to preserve Christmas well. Okay, not to be a horrific, you know, moneylender and slumlord. But what more can we take away from it? And I also wonder, compared to his other books, you know, obviously there's the class criticism, there's the social criticism, but at the end of the day, Scrooge doesn't necessarily, and I don't expect him to by the nature of what the book is, but it's not like Scrooge is going, "Oh, I renounce my class and I am now a revolutionary." Like
Oh yeah, yeah.
that's
No,
not what the book is,
there's none of the revolutionary class suicide about his change. Um, you know, he's the sort of person who from this day forward recognizes, okay, well there are all these abuses that I can engage in, um, you know, that my class affords me, and he decides, you know what? No, I'm going to be one of the good ones.
Well, yeah, he even says, Bob Cratchit, I am raising your salary. His salary at what job? The job he's going to continue to do as the creditor and the landlord. He becomes one of the good ones.
Hmm.
And that is notable. And I'm not like saying, "Oh, Dickens, you messed up." Like it's again, like we've said, it's a story with a moral. It's a parable. But it is interesting, and it is, it does have a sort of critique of the person at the end rather than completely socially. It isn't a book that can be described exclusively as a social narrative, because there are better and worse business people. There are, and obviously there are in real life as well people who are more and less moral in certain places of power. But the setup of power, I mean, you have people like Fezziwig and stuff like that who are doing it the right way. And so, I wonder to what extent, we can walk away from this with a proper class critique.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly not from a perspective of, I don't. It's not a book certainly that advocates for the overthrow of private property relations, but I don't think it needs to.
No, no,
Right?
no, I'm not. Yeah, by no means am I like. It's not a problem. It's just by nature of what this show is, it's just something I kind of wanted to think about.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and you get the sense that you get the sense that Dickens was working within the context of what he felt he could realistically achieve.
Absolutely, and I mean, you think about the time and place, and the sort of relationship between normal people and their exploiters. And like I said earlier, the class divide was so pronounced in such an obvious way. Defining working class versus owner is so specific, with districts of industrial workers and districts of this and that and divides, and it's so explicit that taking one of these members of the ruling class, who is known as the direct enforcer of capital, versus what you have now, which is a more ambiguous abstract enforcement. Not that we don't have those nodes, but the further we go down the line, the more abstract everything gets. Taking one of these people who is the symbol of capitalism, and then taking and basically having him go through this personal reformation. I imagine that someone living in that time probably felt, remarkably vindicating, but it is also just like interesting to read from a modern perspective, because it does feel very antiquated in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the appeal to the appeal to one's conscience is yeah, it's remarkably quaint in the context of, I think, what we're used to.
So here's the question. What would a modern Christmas Carol adaptation look like? Would it be the Bill Murray movie, the Scrooge? Basically, is that probably the best you can do with it?
Well, there was that musical one with Ryan Reynolds that came out just recently. What was it called?
I don't know, and I did not see it, I confess.
It was all over, and then it abruptly disappeared with the closing of the season.
Hmm.
Ryan Reynolds. Let me see.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. It's because it feels so of its time. It feels so Victorian and pre-Victorian. This this moment of industrialism. It feels so British. But of course, it's a story that is very interchangeable. You know, you really could move around a lot of the characters in the story, and indeed, Scrooge did, or not Scrooge, Dickens did, because this is basically his second draft of his Goblin story, like we were saying earlier.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Did you find what you were looking for in the Ryan Reynolds thing?
Spirited, yes.
Huh.
Yes. And Patrick Page plays Jacob Marley in that. No, I had to
What do you
see it.
know? Yeah, no, I've not seen that, and and I'm sure there's like a lot of space for modern adaptation. I just do wonder how much some of the class critiques would be able to stick in the same capacity under a modern retelling of it. Like, I don't feel like the Bill Murray version, as much as I enjoy it, does feel as class conscious as older versions of it. You know what I mean?
No, yeah, it's been a while since I saw Scrooge. I haven't seen that since about middle school, I would say.
It's good. I mean, it's a good movie. I saw it this Christmas. And and obviously we don't have to turn every single thing into like a class narrative or anything. But of course, Christmas Carol definitely feels like it's supposed to a certain capacity. And I appreciate Dickens' willingness to walk that line. I also appreciate the simplicity of it, though. So I don't want it to be taken as a sort of oh man, he really should have had Scrooge do X, Y, and Z at the end. It's a thing that it's hard not to think on too much, because like it's not like he didn't bring class into it at all. He brought class into it extensively.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's unavoidable, and it has, it has examples, I think, for every class to sort of abide by and keep in their hearts, right? Because you have, certainly you have Scrooge as the one who bears the most responsibility for raising people's conditions of for improving the lives of those around him. He's the one with the wealth. He's the one who secures the goose for Bob Cratchit's Christmas dinner. But also, for the Cratchits themselves, right? He is the Ebenezer. He's the Ebenezer Scrooge who, didn't pursue wealth, who didn't achieve wealth, but who nevertheless devoted his life to family, to, being a good father. It's, because it is very easy to fall into that trap of, I gotta hustle. I gotta screw over the guy next to me, to achieve this class mobility that I was promised. And Cratchit has no interest in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, his aspirations are like getting a good job for his son, and keeping his family in some kind of decent condition. And of course, Bob Cratchit, kind of comes out of this as the ideal character. So does, Scrooge's nephew, and of course, Tiny Tim. Though Tiny Tim is a child, though, obviously Dickens loves to have, sort of idyllic child characters. And it's very appealing, especially in Christmas stories.
Absolutely. It's funny, the one thing I stumbled across that really jumped out at me as I was researching for this was his work was described as having issued to the world more political and social truths than have been uttered by all the professional politicians, publicists, and moralists put together. That's a quote from Karl Marx.
Yeah, I mean, who can deny it?
Mm-hmm.
The class consciousness is incredibly strong. You feel the grimy streets of London. You hear the cries of the beggars. You see people choking on the smoke as you make every single thing, in every single work of Dickens. And there's a ton of work to talk about. There's way more complicated things than this book, but it's definitely a lasting part of its legacy. And as we sort of move towards the end, I just wanted to ask your thoughts on this. What do you think? Well, why do you think this book had such staying power beyond the fact that Dickens was just so famous and stuff, of course, and that it's like well written? Why do you think this has, lasted to the point that this is just a narrative we all know to this day?
I mean, because it's genuine, it's earnest. There's nothing of this, there's nothing of the cynic about it. There's nothing of the you know, it gives in a very it gives in a very it gives in a very sincere and forgiving fashion, the what I think we're all looking for, which is an opportunity to reflect and to change in all the ways that might become necessary. Because we always want to be learning creatures. We always want to be evolving and improving, and we don't want to get stuck in our ways. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think this delivers on that. I think this delivers on that very fundamental desire, especially with a writer as evocative as Dickens was.
Absolutely. I think it has those elements. It also has the elements that are interchangeable enough and recognizable enough and archetypal enough to sort of let anyone from any background understand it. I think it has a scene, a setting for its scenes in a dramatic enough location that we all, or a lot of us, recognize in sort of Victorian London. I think it was almost primed to be this dynamo that's able to be adapted and retold over and over and over, to the point of the scary ghost stories that we tell at Christmas, as the song goes. Yeah, but yeah. Do you have any final thoughts before we close this one out?
I was going to say something other than Merry Christmas, but all the holidays and observances that I can see are like various Christian feast days.
What do you think? Well, I mean, we could just say God blesses everyone.
Yeah, essentially, I think Dickens would have Dickens was a devout Christian. He came by that sentiment, honestly.
Absolutely, and so did Tiny Tim, as he says at the end. God blesses everyone.
All right, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.